So yesterday I started reading a book called Truckers by Terry Pratchett, in which, so far in the plot, a gnome called Masklin has attempted to get into a lorry with his friends, other gnomes, and any more that you want about the plot, if you watch the first extract from this video diary, that will hopefully make sense. This is our second extract from Truckers by Terry Pratchett. There have been plenty of them in the days when it didn't seem to rain so much. Masklin could remember at least 40. But then the motorway had come. The stream was put in plights underground, and the nearest hedges were grubbed up. Gnomes had always lived in the corners of the world, and suddenly there weren't too many corners anymore. The numbers started going down. A lot of this was due to natural causes, and when you're 4 inches high, natural causes can be anything with teeth and speed and hunger. Then Prince, who was by way of being the most adventurous, led a desperate expedition across the carriageway one night to investigate the woods on the other side. They never came back. Some said it was hawks. Some said it was a lorry. Some even said they made it halfway and marooned on the central reservation between endless swishing lines of cars. Then the cafe had been built a little further along the road. It had been a sort of improvement, but it depended how you looked at it. If cold leftover chips and scraps of grey chicken were food, then there was suddenly enough for everyone. And then it was spring, and Maskin looked around and found that there were just 10 of them left, and 8 of those were too old to get about much. Old Torrit was nearly 10. It had been a dreadful summer. Grimmer organised those who could still get about into midnight raids on the litter bins, and Masklin tried to hunt. Hunting by yourself was a bit like dying a bit at a time. Most of the things you were hunting were also hunting you, and even if you were lucky enough to make a kill, how did you get it home? It had taken 2 days with the rat, including setting out at night to fight off other creatures. 10 strong hunters could do anything: rob bees' nests, trap mice, catch moles, anything. But one hunter by himself, with no one to watch his back in the long grass, was simply the next meal for anything with talons and claws. To get enough to eat, you needed lots of healthy hunters. But to get lots of healthy hunters, you needed enough to eat. "It'll be all right in the autumn," said Grimmer, bandaging his arm where a stoat had caught it, "but there'll be mushrooms and berries and nuts and everything." Well, there hadn't been any mushrooms, and it had rained so much that most of the berries rotted before they ripened. There were plenty of nuts, though. The nearest hazel tree was half a day's journey away. Masklin could carry a dozen nuts if he smashed them out of their shells and dragged them back in a paper bag from the bin. It took a whole day to do it, risking hawks all the way, and it was just enough food for a day as well. And then the back of the burrow fell in because of all the rain. It was almost pleasant to get out then. It was better than listening to the grumbling about him not doing essential repairs. Oh, and there was a fire. You needed a fire at the burrow mouth, both for cooking and for keeping away night prowlers. Granny Morky went to sleep one day and let it go out. Even she had the decency to look embarrassed. When Masklin came back that night, he looked at the heap of dead ashes for a long time and then stuck his spear in the ground and burst out laughing. And he went on laughing until he started to cry. He couldn't face the rest of them. He had to go and sit outside, where presently Grimmer brought him a shell full of nettle tea. Cold nettle tea. "They're all upset about it," she volunteered. Masklin gave a hollow laugh. "Oh yeah, I can tell," he said. "I've heard them. You ought to bring back another fag end, boy. I'm right out of tobacco, and we never have fish these days. You might find the time to go down the river, and self, that's all you young people think about in my day." Grimmer sighed. "They do their best," she said. "It's just that they don't realise that there were hundreds of us when we were young." "It's going to take days to get that fire lit," said Masklin. They had a spectacle lens, but it needed a very sunny day to work. He poked aimlessly at the mud at his feet. "I've had enough," he said quietly. "I'm going to leave." "But we need you." "I need me too. I mean, what kind of life is this?" "But they'll die if you go away." "They'll die anyway," said Masklin. "That's a wicked thing to say." "Well, it's true. Everyone dies anyway. We'll die anyway. look at you. You spend your whole time washing and tidying up and cooking and chasing after them. You're nearly 3. It's about time you had a life of your own." "Granny Morky was very kind to me when I was small," said Grimmer defensively. "You'll be old one day." "You think?" "And who'll be working their fingers to the bone to look after me?" Masculine found himself getting angrier and angrier. He was certain he was in the right, but it felt as if he was in the wrong, which made it even worse. He thought about this for a long time, and it had always left him feeling angry and awkward. All the clever ones, and the bold ones, and the brave ones had gone long ago, one way or the other. "Good old Masculine," they said. "Stout chap. You look after the old folk, and we'll be back before you know it, just as soon as we found a better place." Every time good old Masculine thought about this, he got indignant about them for going and for himself for staying. He always gave in. That was what his trouble was. He knew it. Whatever he promised himself at the start, he always took the way of least resistance. Grimmer was glaring at him. He shrugged. All right, so they can come with us," he said. "You know they won't go," she said. "They're too old. They all grew up round here. They like it here." "They like it here when there's us around to wait on them," muttered Masculine. They left it at that. There were nuts for dinner. Masculine's had a maggot in it. He went out afterwards and sat at the top of the bank with his chin in his hands, watching the motorway again. It was a stream of red and white lights. There were humans inside those boxes, going about whatever mysterious business humans spent their time on. They were always in a hurry to get to it, whatever it was. He was prepared to bet they didn't eat rats. Humans had it really easy. They were big, they were slow, but they didn't have to live in damp barrows waiting for daft old women to let the fire go out. They never had maggots in their tea. They went wherever they wanted, and they did whatever they liked. The whole world belonged to them. And all night long they drove up and down in those little lorries with lights on. Didn't they ever go to sleep? There must be hundreds of them. He dreamt of leaning on a lorry. They often stopped at the cafe. It'd be easy, well, fairly easy, to find a way onto one. They were clean and shiny, and they had to go somewhere better than this. And after all, what was the alternative? They'd never see winter through here, and setting out across the field with the bad weather coming on didn't bear thinking about. Of course, he'd never do it. You never actually did it in the end. You just dreamed about following those swishing lights. And above the rushing lights, the stars. Torrit said the stars were very important. Right at the moment, Masculine didn't agree. You couldn't eat them. They weren't even much good for seeing by. The stars were actually pretty useless when you thought about it. Somebody screamed. Masculine's body got to his feet before his whole mind had even thought about it and sped silently through the scrubby bushes towards the burrow, where, its head entirely underground and its brush waving excitedly at the stars, was a dog fox. He recognised it. He'd had a couple of close shaves with it in the past. Somewhere inside Masculine's head, the bit of him that was really him, old Torrit, had a lot to say about this bit, was horrified to see him snatch up his spear, which was still in the ground where he plunged it, and stab the fox as hard as he could in a hind leg. There was a muffled yelp, and the animal struggled backwards, turning an evil, foaming mask to its tormentor. Two bright, yellow eyes focused on Masculine, who leaned, panting on his spear. This was one of those times when time itself seemed to slow down, and everything was suddenly much more real. Perhaps, if you knew you were going to die, your senses crammed in as much detail as they could while you still had the chance. There were flecks of blood around the creature's muzzle. Masculine felt himself become angry. It welled up inside him like a huge bubble. He didn't have much, and this grinning thing was taking even that away from him. As the red tongue lolled out, he knew that he had two choices. He could run, or he could die. So he attacked instead. The spear soared from his hand like a bird, catching the fox in the lip. It screamed and pawed at the wound, and Masculine was running across the dirt, propelled by the engine of his anger, and then jumping up, grabbed handfuls of rank red fur and hauled himself up onto the fox's flank to land astride its neck. Drawing his stone knife, he stabbed at everything that was wrong with the world. The fox screamed again and leapt away. If he was capable of thinking then, Maskelyne would have known that his knife wasn't doing much more than annoying the creature. But it wasn't used to meals fighting back with such fury, and its only thought now was to get away. It breasted the embankment and rushed headlong down it towards the lights of the motorway. Maskelyne started to think again. The rushing of the traffic filled his ears. He let it go and threw himself into the long grass as the creature galloped out onto the asphalt. He landed heavily and rolled over, all the breath knocked out of him. But he remembered what happened next. It stayed in his memory for a long time, long after he'd seen so many strange things that there really should have been no room for it. The fox, as still as a statue in a headlight's beam, snarled its defiance as it tried to outstare 10 tons of metal hurtling towards it at 70 miles an hour. There was a bump, a swish, and darkness. Maskelyne lay face down in the cool moss for a long time, and then, dreading what he was about to see, trying not to imagine it, he pulled himself to his feet and plodded back towards whatever was left of his home. Grimmer was waiting at the burrow's mouth, holding a twig like a club. She spun round and nearly brained Maskelyne as he staggered out of the darkness and leaned against the bank. He stuck out a weary hand and pushed the stick aside. "We didn't know where you'd gone," she said, her voice on the edge of hysteria. "We just heard the noise, and there it was. You should have been here, and it got Mr. Mert and Mrs. Coombe, and it was dragging her." She stopped and seemed to sag. "Yes, thank you," said Maskelyne coldly. "I'm all right, thank you very much." What happened?" He ignored her and trooped into the darkness of the burrow and lay down. He could hear the old ones whispering as he lay in a deep, chilly sleep. "I should have been here," he thought. "They depend on me, so we're going. All of us."